So next speaker is William Stevens, who is Professor of Philosophy and Classical and Near Eastern Studies at Creighton University, Omaha. He's also the author of several books, including an English translation of Adolf Bonhoeffer's work, The Ethics of the Stoic Epictetus, and Stoic Ethics, Epictetus and Happiness as Freedom, and also Marcus Aurelius, A Guide for the Perplexed, which is, I think, one of the best introductions to the Stoicism of Marcus Aurelius, and actually one of the best biographies of Marcus Aurelius that I read, as I mentioned to you earlier. And his talk, which, don't worry, I'm going to put the slides up for in a moment, is entitled Phobias, Terrorism, and Stoic Fearlessness. I'll just do your slides, William.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Donald. Thank you. Thank you very much. You know what Marcus Aurelius says about applause, don't you? Applause is just noise. So after my talk is over, if there's deafening silence, that'll be fine. That'll be fine. First, I want to thank Donald and all the members of the Modern Stoicism team for putting together a terrific Stoicon 2017. Let's give them a hand. Let's give them some noise. Done a great job. Secondly, I want to thank all of you for your tremendous Stoic stamina. If you're hungry and you're about to faint, don't wait till the end. Go get some food right away. It's been a long morning session. But if you have a little more stamina, I'll give you some thoughts that I have. Unlike Walter, I am not a psychotherapist. My father was a psychologist, but I am a humble philosophy professor. And so the remarks that I'm going to offer you now are the result of some thoughts that I've had the last year or so. And as a philosophy professor, spending a lot of time in the classroom, I learn all the time from my students. And so I'm hoping that there'll be some questions at the end, because that's the most fun part, is the engagement, right? The response to the lecture. But if you don't get to ask a question during the discussion afterwards, if there's not time, please email me. I bought a stack of business cards with my email. I want to hear from any and everyone who has a question or comment about any of my books. My Stoic Ethics book on Epictetus is coming out next month in a paperback edition from Bloomsbury, much less expensive. If you don't have a copy of that, there's some flyers lying around for that in my Marcus book. So, without further ado, phobias, right? So my topic today is fear. My talk divides into 4 sections. First, I will present an enormous catalog of phobias and then interpret them from a Stoic's perspective. Second, I will report on the leading causes of death, both in the United States and in the world. Those statistics will allow me to compare the number of deaths due to acts of terrorism since 2001 in the 3rd section of my talk. This comparison, I will argue, sheds light on today's political rhetoric about terrorism, and I will conclude by explaining how the Stoics use reason to replace fear with the healthy psychological state called caution. My goal is to show how Stoic thinking can help us strive to achieve fearlessness in our lives. Okay, section 1, myriad phobias. How many different fears have been named in English? The online phobia list names more than 530 phobias. Relatively common disorders include fears of the dark, high places, air travel, open places, enclosed spaces, crowds. Stoicon 2017, kind of scary in that respect, right? Crossing bridges, which my partner and I had to do, driving here from Nebraska, kind of scary, crossing bridges. Darkness, public speaking. Oh my God. There's named phobias for fire, needles, thunder, speed, and foreigners. And here in Canada, I am a foreigner. So maybe you should be afraid of me, since I'm an American. Rarer objects of fear include bald people, bicycles, children, computers, dirt, heaven. Yes, there's a fear of heaven. Fear of light, fear of long words, new things, old people, paper, nasty cuts, right? String, there's fear of teenagers, and fear of being at home, at least a name for it. There's fear of insects, insect stings, ants, bees, cockroaches, lice, mites, moths, spiders, tapeworms, wasps, worms, microbes, parasites, And germs. All of these things have named fears, named phobias. So do bulls, horses, dogs, cats, mice, birds, bats, otters, fish, shellfish, frogs, toads, snakes, and sharks. The fear of animals, all animals, is zoophobia. People with paraskevedekatriophobia fear Friday the 13th. That was yesterday. We survived it, though, somehow. There are names for the fears of such activities as opening one's eyes, defecating, bathing, drinking, undressing in front of someone, coitus, crossing the street, going to school, throwing things away, dancing, conversing over dinner, riding in an automobile. How many of you rode an automobile in the last week, right? Being stared at. Sitting, walking, being tickled, stooping, stuttering, seeing oneself in a mirror. Fear of vomiting and even going to bed is feared. There are named fears of eyes, hands, chin, beards, belly buttons, knees, hair, rectums, and genitals. There are names for the fear of each of the colors, yellow, red, purple, black, and white, as well as for the fear of colors generally. There are names for the fear of each of the numbers, 4, 5, 8, 13, and 666. Whether a fear of illness, accidents, injury, fever, heart disease, diabetes, dentists, speed, or pain seems more or less justifiable will vary from person to person. Bad experiences in childhood, no doubt, have a lot to do with phobias. So do genetic predispositions. But what about fearing fog, ghosts, or being alone? Or fearing clouds, clothing, or nudity? Or the fear of blushing, trees, or clowns? Or the fear of puppets, body odor, or wealth? What of the fear of dolls, growing bald, or the moon? Or the fear of clocks, or stars, or books? Don't fear my books. Arachnobutyrophobia is the fear of peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth. Could one reasonably justify even moderate worry about these things? To fear beautiful women is to suffer from caligynophobia. The fear of hearing good news is termed euphobia. Geliophobes fear laughter. Hedonophobes fear feeling pleasure. Ideophobes fear ideas. Pantophobes fear everything. And the fear of fear itself is called, you guessed it, phobophobia. How common are phobias? According to the American Psychiatric Association, phobias are the most common psychiatric illness among women and the second most common among men. The National Institute of Mental Health suggests that phobias affect approximately 19.2 million U.S. adults. These phobias typically emerge from childhood or adolescence and continue into adulthood. They also impact twice as many women as they do men. There are a number of explanations for why phobias develop, including evolutionary and behavioral theories. Phobias lead to marked fear and symptoms such as dizziness, nausea, and breathlessness. In some cases, these symptoms escalate into a full-blown panic attack. Which phobias are the most common? The top 10 appear to be arachnophobia, spiders and arachnids, ophidiophobia, fear of snakes, acrophobia, the fear of heights, aerophobia, the fear of flying, kunophobia, the fear of dogs, Astraphobia, thunder and lightning, trypanophobia, injections, sociophobia, the fear of social situations, agoraphobia, open or crowded spaces, and mysophobia, which has several names, but it's the fear of germs or contamination. One source reports that the fear of arachnids affects women 4 times more than it does men, 48% of women and 12% of men on this study. fear arachnids. Another source reports that arachnophobia affects as many as 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men. So why are so many people terrified of arachnids? Well, there are an estimated 35,000 different spider species. Only about a dozen pose any type of real threat to humans. A common explanation for this and similar animal phobias is that arachnids, insects, snakes, and similar creatures once posed a considerable threat to our ancestors who lacked the medical knowledge and technological tools to treat bites from animals and insects. Thus, evolution contributed to a predisposition to fear these animals and insects. Ophidiophobia, the fear of snakes, is quite common. In a study of 35 snake-fearful participants, however, researchers found that only 3 of these individuals had ever been bitten by a snake. The majority of the participants had little or no direct experiences with snakes in any capacity. Another theory suggests that the fear of snakes and similar animals might arise from an inherent fear of disease and contamination. Studies have shown that these animals tend to provoke a disgust response, which might explain why snake phobias are so common, yet people tend not to exhibit similar phobias of dangerous animals such as lions or bears. Acrophobia, the fear of heights, afflicts an estimated 23 million adults. Aerophobia, the fear of flying, affects an estimated 8 million US adults, despite the fact that airplane accidents are actually very uncommon. About 1 out of every 3 people has some level of fear of flying. Common symptoms associated with aerophobia include trembling, rapid heartbeat, and feeling disoriented. Kinophobia, the fear of dogs, is often associated with specific personal experiences, such as being bitten by a dog during childhood. Such events can be quite traumatic and can lead to fear responses that last well into adulthood. Kinophobia can be quite common. Some estimates suggest that as many as 36% of all individuals who seek treatment for a specific phobia have this severe fear of dogs. Astrophobia, the fear of thunder and lightning, is relatively common. Understandably, astrophobes also tend to develop an excessive preoccupation with tracking weather forecasts. In some instances, astrophobes may become agoraphobes when they are so afraid of encountering lightning or thunder that they are unable to leave their homes. Trypanophobia, the fear of injections, is a condition that can sometimes cause people to avoid medical treatments and fear doctors, which is iatrophobia. Estimates suggest that as many as 10% of people in the US are trypanophobic. Sociophobia, the fear of social situations, often includes fear of being watched, scopophobia, or humiliated in front of others. The most common form of sociophobia is glossophobia, the fear of public speaking. Agoraphobia involves a fear of being alone in a situation or place where escape may be difficult. This type of phobia may include the fear of crowded areas or open spaces. Agoraphobia usually develops sometime between late adolescence and the mid-30s. The American Psychiatric Association reports that 2/3 of people with agoraphobia are women. Mysophobia, or the excessive fear of germs and dirt, can lead people to engage in extreme cleaning, compulsive hand washing, and even avoidance of things or situations perceived as dirty. In some instances, this phobia may be related to obsessive-compulsive disorder. We might be tempted to think that our own phobias are kind of reasonable, whereas the phobias of other people are kind of silly. This temptation to discount the seriousness of phobias that we do not share with others is probably stronger in the case of especially exotic phobias. But we should remember that phobias are serious problems for those afflicted by them. Phobias are debilitating and undermine our capacity to live our lives with a feeling of safety. How did the Stoics conceive of phobias? Well, first, as earlier speakers have mentioned, the Stoics distinguished between the immediate involuntary physiological response to the appearance of an unwelcome thing and the voluntary, deliberate, cognitive judgment that that unwelcome thing is dangerous and bad. right? So that's the proto-emotion and then the real emotion of fear. The Stoics called the former propathia, pre-emotions or proto-passions. Examples include being startled and flinching when hearing a sudden, loud, and unexpected noise, shivering when sprinkled with cold water, the feeling of disgust when touching something slimy, the feeling of vertigo caused by heights, or hair bristling upon hearing bad news, and blushing at obscene language. All of these are examples that Seneca gave of pre-emotions. Since these physiological responses happen without our consent, we are not responsible for them, according to the Stoics. But after these proto-passions occur, it is up to us whether we judge the presence of the unwelcome thing as bad. If we have a few moments to think about it, and then we voluntarily decide that the unwelcome thing is truly bad, then we experience real fear. But the Stoics insist that a real fear response is the result of a mental judgment that we make consciously. We control our power of assent to the proposition, for example, that this slimy thing is truly bad and truly scary. If we don't assent to this proposition, then we won't be afraid. Thus, the Stoics conceive of fear as the consequence of a voluntary cognitive act, not a brief, involuntary physiological reaction. The most commonly used therapeutic treatment for phobias is, following Walter, you guessed it, cognitive behavior therapy, or REBT. Phobias can be minimized and even eliminated with CBT. And the basic idea of CBT originated, as we know, with the ancient Stoics. What did the ancient Stoics regard as the most popular and most troubling fear? That's it. Unsurprisingly, it's the fear of death. Most people today, I expect, believe that the fear of death, called thanatophobia, is very reasonable and quite justified. So let's now look at the top 10 causes of death. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report that in the US in 2013, oh, my slides aren't going. Sorry. There's a fear of computers, right? Is this forward? This one? Sorry, oh yeah, so there's the list, right? My partner helped me with the PowerPoints here, and I said, I want all 530 on there, and she said, no, you can't get that many on there. So this is just a list of few things, right? Fear of hotophobia, right? We had to drive all the way from Omaha, so it's a good thing we didn't have fear of road travel. Fear of clowns. Seems pretty reasonable to some people. Fear of paper, saw in there, fear of heights, aerophobia, right? So the 10 most common. There we go. Here we go. All right. Is that better? All right. Top 10 causes of death. Sorry about that. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report that in the US in 2013, the leading causes of death were heart disease, cancer, as you can see, chronic lower respiratory diseases, accidents, that is unintentional injury, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, influenza and pneumonia, and nephritis, nephrotic syndrome, and nephrosis. That's 3 different things. Suicides outnumbered motor vehicle deaths, 32,719, which outnumbered firearm homicides, over 11,000. That's in 2013 alone. So it's a pretty representative year. Okay. Let's see. The World Health Organization, WHO, reports that in 2012, the top 10 causes of death worldwide were ischemic heart disease, 7.4 million, stroke, 6.7 million, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, over 3 million, lower respiratory infections, over 3 million, lung, trachea, and bronchus cancers, 1.6 million, HIV/AIDS, 1.5 million, diarrheal diseases took 1.5 million lives in 2012, diabetes mellitus, 1.5 million, road injuries and car crashes, 1.3 million. You wearing your seatbelts? And hypertensive heart disease, over 1 million. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization estimates that about 805 million people of the 7.35 billion people in the world, or 1 in 9, were suffering from chronic undernourishment in the years 2012 to 2014. The vast majority of these hungry people live in developing regions. Approximately 3.1 million children die from hunger each year. 3.1 million children per year. The WHO estimates that there were 627,000 malaria deaths worldwide in 2012, making mosquitoes, which also carry the viral infection dengue, the most dangerous animal in the world. In 2014, motor vehicle traffic-related injuries resulted in 33,736 deaths, accounting for 16.9% of all accidental, that is, unintentional injury deaths. Thus, there is far greater statistical justification for amaxophobia, the fear of riding in a car, than for fearing a terrorist attack. So now we turn to terrorism. It's a cheery topic before lunch. Stoicism can help us sort through this now. According to the Center for Research on Globalization, the number of Americans who died worldwide in terrorist attacks in 2013 was 8. Whereas the number who died after being struck by lightning was 29. This source asserts that the U.S. State Department reports that in 2011, only 17 U.S. citizens were fatal victims of terrorism worldwide, including in Afghanistan, Iraq, and all other theaters of war. The Canadian Global Research Center calculates that Americans are more than 35,079 times more likely to die from heart disease, 33,842 times more likely to die from cancer, and 4,706 times more likely to die from excessive use of alcohol than from a terrorist attack. In an October 3rd, 2016 article, CNN compares the number of Americans killed by acts of terrorism to the number of Americans killed by gun violence. Consider the year 2014. For every one American killed by an act of terror in the United States or abroad in 2014, more than 1,049 died because of guns. Now consider the period from 2001 to 2014. Using numbers from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CNN found that from 2001 to 2014, 440,095 people died by firearms on U.S. soil. 2014 is the most recent year for which the CDC has data for deaths by firearms. This data covered all manners of death, including homicide, accident, and suicide. How does that compare to deaths resulting from acts of terrorism? According to the U.S. State Department, the number of U.S. citizens killed overseas as a result of incidents of terrorism from 2001 to 2014 was 369. Inside the United States, CNN found that between 2001 and 2014, 3,043 people were killed in domestic acts of terrorism, right? So that's including 2001. This brings the total to 3,412. So what do you think, looking at this graph? What is your judgment? Which seems more urgent? Maybe reasonable gun control legislation, or spending far, 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 far money on domestic security and trying to root out terrorist attacks? Want to do both? Well, do we want to do both? The U.S. State Department Bureau of Counterterrorism compiled statistics displaying terrorism-related deaths, injuries, and kidnappings of private U.S. citizens from 2010 through 2015. Over these 6 years, the average number of deaths related to terrorism is 17 per year, with as few as 10 in 2012 and as many as 24 in 2014. The number of injuries related to terrorism during this period is also remarkably low and quite steady, averaging 10.33 per year. Kidnappings related to terrorism are even less common. What about other causes of death? Consider hurricanes. 2017 has been quite a year for hurricanes. The New York Times reported on September 1st, 2017, that Hurricane Harvey had caused 1,833 deaths. That was on September 1st. Obviously, Harvey was far more lethal than all the terrorist attacks worldwide combined over the last year. Hurricane Irma was the most powerful hurricane ever recorded in the open Atlantic Ocean. Irma killed between 70 and 80 people in the Caribbean and the southeastern United States. The death toll in Puerto Rico from Hurricane Maria is disputed, and it's ongoing. Current estimates range from 45 to more than 450. Hurricane Katrina was responsible for 1,836 fatalities in 2005. Consequently, the direct and indirect deaths due to this year's hurricanes exceed the 2,996 lives lost in the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001. And that's just hurricanes. What about earthquakes? What about other natural disasters? What about flooding, right? I think you're getting the point. Politicians are notorious for manipulating voters by using rhetoric that plays on their fears. Media sources routinely report bombings and mass shootings, while pundits debate whether each attack is an act of terrorism or not. But the most common causes of death receive little notice and little attention by major media outlets. They're boring, but they're far more common. Easy-to-find statistics correct such a distorted accounting of the relative risks of fatality in North America. Okay, how do Stoics replace fear with caution? Are Stoics free of all phobias? Interestingly, the answer is no. Professor Epictetus, as he's been called today, Epictetus was not free of phobias. He had a couple of them. Here's a quotation, right? He confesses to having thalassophobia, the fear of the sea. He writes, or rather Arian writes, he lectures, "Whenever I go to sea, as soon as I gaze down into the depths or look at the waters around me and see no land, I am beside myself, and imagine that if I am wrecked, I must swallow all that sea. Nor does it once enter my head that 3 pints are enough." Similarly, in an earthquake, Epictetus imagines that the city is going to crash down on him. But he realizes that one little stone is enough to knock his brains out. What causes the alarm is not the sea or the earthquake, but the judgment that one will be permanently separated from one's companions, familiar places, and social relations, coupled with the false judgment that such separation is evil. To the contrary, Epictetus argues that it does not matter whether one dies from an accident, through human agency, or even being frightened by a mouse, as one ancient philosopher was reported to have died. Heart attack when a mouse fell off the wall. Death results from all these many causes, so no one cause of death is scarier than any other, according to Epictetus. Where's the hardship when something that was born is destroyed? The instrument of destruction is either a sword, or a wheel, or the sea, or a tile, or a tyrant. And what does it matter to you by what way you descend to Hades? All roads are equal. But if you want to hear the truth, the one that a tyrant sends you along is shorter. No tyrant ever took 6 months to cut someone's throat. But a fatal fever often lasts a year. All these things are meaningless noise and the boasting of empty names. All roads to death are equal means that they are all equally indifferent because they all lead to the very same destination. The phrase descent to Hades is simply Epictetus' concession to a popular religious reference to death. Stoics reject the possibility of an afterlife, as we know. Epictetus diffuses the threatening-sounding names, decapitation by a sword, being broken on a wheel, etc., by recasting them as inarticulate noise, mere static hiss from the mouths of non-Stoics who don't understand death. They boast about the horrors of various gruesome executions a tyrant could command, but this is vacuous clamor. All paths to death lead to the same destination, so every manner of death is equally indifferent to a Stoic. Epictetus thinks that Socrates was wise to call death and all such things that non-Stoics foolishly fear bugbears. The Greek word is wonderful. Mormalukeia, boogeymen, bugbears, right? For just as masks seem fearsome and terrible to children because of their inexperience, we are affected in a similar manner by events for much the same reason as children are affected by bugbears. For what is a child? Ignorance. What is a child? Lack of instruction. For where a child has knowledge, he is no worse off than we are. What is death? A bugbear. Turn it around and see what it is. See, it does not bite. Stoics have examined death and understand it, and so they fear it no more than adults who have examined Halloween monster masks and see that there is nothing scary behind them. Death, Stoics believe, is not what motivates shameful deeds. Rather, the fear of death drives us to abandon our duties, to betray our comrades, and act as cowards in order to save our hides. Epictetus says, quote, "It is not death or pain that is to be feared, but the fear of pain or death," unquote. In effect, he recommends that we adopt a kind of savvy phobophobia. Quote, if instead of death or exile, we feared fear itself, we would practice avoiding those things that appear to us to be evil, unquote. So Epictetus insists that our confidence should be directed toward death, whereas our caution should focus on the false judgment that death is fearful. Death cannot rob us of our moral integrity, but fear can when, out of fear, we disgrace ourselves. So here I'm just distinguishing the fear of one's own death, thanatophobia, from necrophobia, which is the fear of dying people, or the fear of other people dying, or other animals dying, other things dying. So Epictetus asks his students in text 4, will you then realize that this epitome of all human evils and of meanness and of cowardice is not death, but rather the fear of death? Against this, then, discipline yourself. Toward this let all your reasonings, your exercises, your readings tend, and you will know that only in this way are human beings liberated. Stoics believe that all phobias result from habitually making irrational judgments. Those who fear death fail to fully understand and accept the fact that all living things are mortal. So what is it to be a human being? To be a human being is to be mortal. So his view on the desire for immortality is that this is deeply irrational because it means what? Desiring not to be a human. Human persons are mortal. Mortals die. So the healthy thing would be to accept that, right? About oneself and about all the human beings one loves, and about your goldfish, and about your cats, right? So for Stoics then, death is nothing tragic, nothing shameful, and so nothing evil. Death is not dreadful, according to Stoics. Only dying shamefully is dreadful. Epictetus thinks that removing the fear of death removes not only the greatest obstacle to a happy life, it also undermines all lesser fears, right? If you're not afraid of death, you should be able to figure out why there's no rational ground for fearing anything else. Now, one may object that since Stoics think that we should try to become totally fearless, this will lead to utter recklessness. But I think this objection fails. The Stoics, in fact, advise that the proper mental disposition to maintain when facing dangerous circumstances is caution. The Greek word is eulabeia. The Stoics advise us always to look before leaping. We ought to be circumspect, consider our options, and then act with care. This thoughtful wariness involves no worry, no anxiety, and no fear. Stoic fearlessness consists in caution, not recklessness. Stoic thinking about fear can help us in at least 3 ways. First, Rational emotive behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy, both inspired by Stoic exercises, empower us to rid ourselves of specific phobias. Second, knowing some facts about likely causes of death can protect us from alarmists whose political rhetoric wildly distorts the dangers of harm from acts of terrorism. Third, knowing some facts about the diseases that are the leading causes of death may inspire us to healthier eating habits, drinking plenty of water, daily exercise, and getting some quality sleep, as well as working to aid those vulnerable to death from poverty. And there are millions of such people. Stoicism both dispels fallacious appeals to fears about terrorism and sweeps away the phobias that block us from living happily. Thank you.